You can take do all this stuff.
I think you're live.
Okay, how do I get the flipped it?
No, this is good. Like if you put it right here, where are you gonna be sitting? Or
I'm gonna
you're
stand.
just walking.
Yeah. Is that cool?
Oh. But this way you can.
I'm not. I know. I won't be.
Oh,
Able to see
you
it.
can flip it around and then here. I don't know.
Other way, yeah. Yo, I hate those. It's like, look at you though. The Muslim boys know. MashaAllah. He's great. It's like, I've suffered. I don't want to spread this any further. It's already recorded. Custom and Sharia. Yeah. That's my professor by it's like yeah. What? I'm planning on the Zakah one. The double one is on Saturday. Saturday's on No, Shane, you're so he's my professor, but I've been a bad student. For the Saturday one? I started I think they interviewed him long. Now I know. Before reading for this dissertation, I'm reading that.
New legend seats.
Oh yeah, that's the one. That's the one. There's a new investment fund. على مشيئتكم. عليكم. Honest. Honest? Yes. Pleasure.
It's really high up there.
I was saying it well, like. Oh, that's custom. Is that custom or Sharia? Let's go. Islam versus culture. That's what we all want.
Do Command Plus. See if it does it for the whole thing.
It's individual, each one.
Oh.
This?
الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Is it okay if I walk around like this? Is it loud? Is it right? Is it loud enough? Are there people up there? I mean, I think it's good. Bismillah, alhamdulillah. I'm really excited to be here because I worked here 2015 and 16. Then I left to do a PhD, alhamdulillah, and I'm almost done now, alhamdulillah. And inshallah, I'm in the process of coming back, inshallah, and starting in the seminary full time next September, inshallah. But in the meantime, inshallah, I'd like to share with you what I've been doing for all this time, alhamdulillah. Well, first, I'm from Orange County. I grew up here, went to UCI, and then I went to Damascus for 4 years. And alhamdulillah, let me show you this real quick. I had the opportunity to study with, mashallah, some really, many of the shuyukh that I studied with, they studied directly with Ibn Abidin, who's the focus of our study today, his great-grand-nephew, all right? So they're all just 3 or 4 people removed from Ibn Abidin. And alhamdulillah, I don't know what caused me to go overseas, but now in retrospect, I'm starting to look back, and I think I got hit with a lot of my family's du'as, okay? Because I was in Jami Sheikh Muhyiddin, and we were listening to the Sunan al-Abi Dawud. You know, it takes like 7 days to listen to it from Fajr to Isha. The Sheikh was reading through it, and he was reading some of the different asanid. Let me find this real quick. This is yeah. So he was reading all the different senads, the chains of narrations that Abu Dawud has reached us, you know? And so this is the Damascus chain, the one that I got pulled into, or, you know, into, right? Otherwise, subhanAllah, I wish I would have spent more time in India, because I found out, my mom would always talk about this Sheikh, Haydar Nana, and Mahmoud Nana, okay? But I never knew anything about them. And then I'm listening to Sheikh Akram Nadwi's Senate, right? Sheikh Akram Nadwi relates from who? Ali Mia. Who's Ali Mia? Yes. Ali Hassan Nadwi. Ali Hassan Nadwi, right? And his Sheikh is Haydar Hassan Khan Toki, who is my great-granduncle. And the thing is, I didn't know that, so I looked at the Tunisian guy next to me who I just met. It's like, oh, that's my aunt, my uncle, my great uncle. My parents have always been talking to me about that. I didn't know that they studied hadith. And so once I found out, like, you know, my grandfather was mufassir, my great-grandfather was many different sciences, faqih, but also specialist in hadith. And then Haydar Hassan Khan Toki, and I really can honestly say that my life has been significantly different because they probably made dua for someone in their progeny to continue on the same path that they are on. And I mean, there's so many pathways I could have gone in my life, but alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. All right, so the presentation here, bismillah. So, anyone know who Samuel Huntington is? Yes. Samuel Huntington, he has this idea, he got it from Bernard Lewis and other people, the clash of civilizations, that Islam and the West are in a perpetual conflict, okay? And now the response to that by historians like Galvin at UCLA is that the problem, if you think Islam and the West are billiard balls that bounce up against each other, instead we should think of cultures, and what culture should be more porous, right? Because the way that Muslims related to Islam in the 7th century is very different from the 21st century, right? We didn't even have madhabs in the beginning, right? And so I thought, okay, I'm not in the business of studying Islam. I'm going to limit my study to the Sharia, okay? And can I employ some of the same ideas about the Sharia that Galvin responded to this class of civilizations? And I'll give you an example here. So, if we treat the Sharia as a closed category meaning that it doesn't allow for anything to come in, okay? Then who knows what siyasa shari'iyya is? Siyasa shari'iyya, what is that?
Religious politics.
Yeah, religious politics. Who came up with that idea? The hybrid. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya tells us that his Sheikh, Ibn Taymiyyah, is a book called Turuq al-Hukmiyya. There was many different ways this could have gone. There were some people, he relates this from Ibn Aqil, who's another Baghdadi Hanbali, that some people wanted to completely separate Sharia and Siyasa, okay? And then there were some people who thought that Siyasa and Sharia, that the Sharia has nothing to say about Siyasa. So Ibn Qayyim and Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, they come up with a hybrid. And now this category, in the Mamluk era, and then the Ottomans run with it. The Ottomans really benefit from the category. But nevertheless, Sharia was not part, Siyasa was not part of Sharia before the Mamluks and Ibn Taymiyyah, and actually Ibn Qayyim's long works on that, right? So you see there's ideas that the fuqaha and the scholars, if there's an idea out there, they can bring it into the realm of Sharia. Another one, Ibn Abidin, also, who I'm going to be looking at, and most of you probably heard this before. I know Muhammad Zakaria al-Kandahlawi has an article on Sharia, Tariqa, and Haqiqa. Have you ever heard of that before? Sharia being the outward, Tariqa is the inward practice of it, Haqiqa is the inward opening of your insight so you can witness Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's like the fruit of the Tariqa, practicing it. Before the Mamluk era, those things were not connected. Sharia was by itself, and then there was Tariqa, who was like, there was Sufis over there who were doing Haqiqa, but they brought it in, and it was merged in Ibn Abidin's time so much so that he couldn't even see Sharia, Tariqa being separate. Okay, does that make sense? Tariqa meaning like the practice of the Sharia. So, I wanted to look at this, and this is the overall purpose. I'm going to zoom in to Ibn Abidin, who is a Hanafi, in the Hanafi school. But the thing is, there's bigger questions we're going to talk about, okay? One of them is there's a guy who wrote a book called What is Islam? Shahab Ahmed, okay? And so, in trying to define what Islam is, he's like, what is this analytical category Islam we're looking at? And he tried to put forth his definition. But for me, the thing that's interesting is when we look at the little parts of Islam, what Sharia, right? And we study the humanities, mean like grammar and poetry and stuff like that, theology, right? That there's many different subjects, but do they bounce off each other? Or is there a reconciliation? Like the Sharia scholars are reading theology, they're reading the humanities, they're reading the books on siyasa, and I try to redefine the parameters of, it's a category, it's an academic category of Sharia, that it's porous, and I can show you how this has been bringing in things and moving out things for quite some time. Is that Zainab? MashaAllah, come here Zainab, you sit with me. Bismillah. That is Zainab, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Alhamdulillah, sorry. So, Alhamdulillah, I thought I came up with a way to redefine the constituent parts within Islam through my study, and I'll come back to this slide at the end, inshallah. Now, I'm focusing on the Hanafi school, the Hanafi madhab. What's fascinating for me, that's a picture of Ibn Abidin's son, Ala-ad-Din. I think that the coolest thing is like, someone's like, let me take your picture, sorry, let me get a book. I mean, it's pretty awesome that of all the things, he chose to to pose with a book, because that's what he was about, Alhamdulillah, may Allah make us on their path. But Abu Hanifa lived in Baghdad, Kufa. Sorry, Baghdad didn't exist at the time. He lived in Kufa, right? He was born at the end of the Umayyad and was born in the Abbasid era. But he's separated by Ibn Abidin with over 1,000 years. And I just thought, if you think about 1,000, how does a madhab coherently continue for that long? It's almost shocking, right? Particularly in what we call modernity, okay? I'm going to talk about what modernity is and what it's not, but I just want to plug an advertisement real quick. I, inshallah, am going to teach a 10-week course on my dissertation after Ramadan here, inshallah. And so some of the bigger questions that we're going to get into today, I'm not going to be able to delve into it, but if you come to the class, inshallah, we can, but I'm not going to be able to go through the history of the Umayyads and Abbasid and Seljuks and Mamluks. I'll touch upon those, assuming you guys know what they are. If you don't, I can explain. But I'm also going to look, for a second, I'm going to jump right into Western scholarship, okay? Well, why am I going to do that? What do the Western academics say about Islam? Number one, are they wrong? Number two, what assumptions do they have? And how do we respond from our own tradition to show who's right? Okay. And also, I'm not going to get into this, but in the longer class, in this project, I worked on, I did this amazing thing where, alhamdulillah, in order, like, alhamdulillah, I studied in Damascus and Cairo, Azhar, I'm a graduate of Azhar, and so I got the Islamic training pretty well over there, right? When I went to the PhD, I started studying like Western philosophy, because these are the categories that were being assessed through, right? And so I studied with a guy, David Albertson, who studied with Levinas, who studied with Gadamer, who studied with Heidegger, and I didn't go all the way back to the Enlightenment. The thing was, I entered that world to speak it like a first language, so that I could then come back to our own tradition and see what kind of holes that they have in their tradition that Islam can kind of help with, you know? So there's this back and forth, but I'm not going to go into that. You can come join the class for that, because it takes a long time to unpack that stuff. But some of the questions we want to talk about is, what is modernity? Is it tied to secularism? Is Islam compatible with modernity? And is there an economic and political dimension? And if there is, what are the sources of authority in those dimensions? We're going to talk about all that stuff today, inshallah. Any questions? It gives me an opportunity to take a sip of water. Okay, alhamdulillah.
So we have a question.
Yeah, bismillah.
Can you backtrack for a second?
Oh, yes, this?
No.
Yeah.
If you could give us a foothold, why did you write your dissertation on this? Why is it important?
I'm going to touch on that very shortly right now. Thank you, good question. Okay, so when I showed up in Damascus in 2007, before I knew Arabic, I bought a copy of this book called the Hashia of Ibn Abidin, 20 volumes. I couldn't even read Arabic, you know, but I knew that everyone was trying to get to that level, okay? So I had this book, and maybe because I was in Damascus, but everyone knew stories of Ibn Abidin. They studied with his great-grandnephew, and so he was alive being talked about, but when I came back here to the West, there's not even one book on him. There's like 3 or 4 articles, you know, that's it. Maybe 2 good ones. And so you see this disparity between what the Academy cares about and what Muslims care about, okay? And I'm going to try to highlight why this disjunction exists, but I thought Ibn Abidin was important because he was kind of heralded as like the top of the chain, you know, you got to get to this guy. But I've come to realize he's even more important because he straddles this, you know, we talk about modernity. I'm going to talk about that, what it means, but the thing is, he's writing a hashia. What's a hashia? It's a commentary on a text. So the text is by Tumutashi, then the commentary is by Haskafi, and then Ibn Abidin comments on Haskafi. So he's completely trained in that traditional model, but he says, I'm the first to deal with insurance. What is insurance all about? So look, you see how Istanbul, I can't even see that, subhanAllah. No, where is Istanbul? Hey, it's okay. Istanbul was the head, the center of the world for maybe 300-400 years, okay? And then power shifted to Western Europe with the industrialization. And they got these new things called joint stock corporations where they start sending all their goods over to the West. So Ibn Abidin, he says, I'm the first to deal with it. There's this contract, and he Arabicizes it. It's called sukrata, which is security. Security is in Italian, meaning insurance. And he says, I've looked in every single book, and no one has ever talked about this, and I'm the first to deal with it. And I was like, wow, this guy saw capitalism? This guy saw that stuff? Because when you see him and you hear about him, you don't think he saw those aspects of our world, but he did. And in his lifetime, Muhammad Ali, does anyone know anyone? Muhammad Ali Pasha. Muhammad Ali Pasha, he rebels against the Ottomans, and he takes over where? Independent. Egypt, yes. And then in 1831, when Ibn Abidin is alive, his son Ibrahim Pasha takes all of Sham, all of Syria, and they use it almost like a backwater to support in the industrialization of Egypt. So Ibn Abidin is watching what we would think like some of the main aspects of the nation state. Conscription. Conscription meaning you take the army from your own people. Before they would bring in Mamluks, they were bringing people from the outside, Circassians and stuff like that. Like that's how Muhammad Ali is from Albania, right? But then he disarms everyone, He starts poll taxing everyone. He really, gets rid of the jizya and all these kind of things. So Ibn Abidin, in the last 5 years of his life, he sees a lot of aspects that we might be familiar with. And I thought that was amazing. I was like, wow, I never knew I just thought he was one of those old guys, back in the day. And so but also in Ibn Abidin's time, when he's young, what happens in Mecca and Medina? The Ottomans lose them to who? Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, yes. He takes Mecca and Medina. Okay, ever since Nuruddin Zingi and his student, who's a student? Salahuddin, they started using the title caretaker Khadim al-Haramain. Because if you're in control of the Haramain, you're legit. Everyone's going to be like, yeah, this guy's good to go, And so the Ottomans losing the Haramain is a big blow to their religious power. Thirdly, when Ibn Abidin is like 12 or something like that, Napoleon enters and takes over Alexandria, and he comes all the way to Acre, which is by Palestine and Sham, and he's repelled. But Ibn Abidin sees the massive influx of Ottoman army personnel going to repel Napoleon. Okay, so the Ottomans are severely challenged externally and internally. Okay, and in terms of economics, the Muslim worlds go bankrupt here at this point because all the money is being sent to Western Europe, and the Muslims are sending all of their textiles, raw textiles, that become made into goods cheaper, and then they're flooded in the markets over there. So what happened was there were some local guilds and craft, but not much before industrialization, but they imploded. Before all of our books of Islam, the ones that we read pre-modern, were written in an agrarian economy, okay? And we have this shift to industrialization. Agrarian economy means people are plowing in the fields. Most of the stuff comes from crops that are then taxed and stuff like that. And you have now, even in Aberdeen's time, you have this shift. And from empire to nation state. 1821, in his lifetime, Greece gets independent. Hungary, the Balkans, they start rupturing the Ottoman Empire with this new idea called nationalism, okay? So he's witnessing all this stuff. And I just thought it was fascinating that in his mind, he thinks he can save the ship. We know the ship is not saved, obviously the Ottomans implode. But in his mind, he thinks if we just get this right, we can save the ship. Power has shifted already to Western Europe, I said. Lloyd's, and Western Europe meaning like England and Germany and these places, France, because they're very present in the Muslim world at this point. But Ibn Abidin is amazing because he still has the psyche that we, for 1,000 years, have been on top and we can do this. And I just love the confidence that he has. Wallahi, that confidence permeates through the pages. When he says that, I used to think he was being boastful when he would say, you won't find a tahrir, an analysis like this in any other book. Or my hashia is required reading for everyone because I was able to achieve so many conclusions and clarifications that la yustaghna anhu, you can't do without it. But he always ends, هذا بفتح العلام القدير. He always gives it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The qudra flows through him onto the pages. And I just thought this was a fascinating person to look at. Particularly because he straddles that era, and then there's this idea here that now this helps me here. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to point at this one. Okay. So this is on the left. This is the Risala by Ibn Abidin. He writes the first in the history of Islam, the second independent tract on custom. Before, where was custom found? What books? Qawaid Fiqhiyya, legal maxims. And at the end of Usul al-Fiqh books, we have Adilla al-Mukhtalaf fiha, and they'll list urf or custom and stuff like that. Ibn Abidin thought there was something important about his moment. In 1826, he writes the first essay dedicated just to custom. But before him in 1685, a Maliki scholar writes the first one called Amal of Ahl al-Fez, the practice of the people of Fez. But Ibn Abidin's is a little more theoretical. Yes? Who's Ibn Abidin? I will go, good question. What's that? Yes, in 1685, someone wrote an essay called The Amal of Ahlul Faz. But by Amal, he means the practice, the social practice, right? And what influence does that have in the Maliki school? And in the next century, Ibn Abidin writes, Nashr al-Arf fi bina'i ba'd al-masa'il al-'urf. The spreading of perfume in this essay about some masa'il, some legal rulings being built upon custom. Okay, so I'll go through, that's a good idea, I should have gone through Ibn Abidin, but nevertheless, let me just tell you something that happened to me. This is my own learning process here, okay? See, this is Ibn Abidin's letter on custom here, and you see this line right here, which I wrote right there? The line that's right there. I thought that was this was published in 1909 or 1908, and I thought that was a modern editor who put this footnote on the bottom. Okay, so I was like, oh man, who's this guy who's ruining Ibn Abidin's pristine, pre-modern presentation of Islamic law? Why was I a little bit, I wasn't upset, I was surprised, because he says, Yusr, Aysar, Allahu Akbar, hold on. Taysir, Aysar, and Darura. Okay, let me tell you about these things. What does Taysir mean? Ease, making things easy, okay? We graduated from Azhar. For 4 years, we had this class called Qadaya Fiqhiyya Mu'asara, meaning contemporary legal issues, and then we also had fiqh muqaran, comparative fiqh. And generally, it goes like this, I'm simplifying, it'll say like, here's the presentation of the legal problem, or the case, legal mas'ala. Here's the Adillatul Ahnaf, here are the proofs of the Hanafis, Adillatul Malikiyya, Adillatul Shafi'iyya, Adillatul Ibn Hazm. So they'll go through all the adillah of everyone, right? The proofs, and then they'll say tabjih. Their next section is, okay, what is the preferred opinion from what we just looked at before? And inevitably, it was just like a habit, I just see the dalil al-awwal, yuridu Allahu bikum al-yusr. Allah has wanted ease for the deen, therefore we should use ease as a guiding principle. Second, the Prophet was never given an option, except he would choose the easier of two options, right? And so I just got programmed into my head like, wow, this whole idea of like using ease as a guiding principle and considering darura must be a modern rupture, a break from the tradition. So I was like, man, why is this modernist, Rashid Ribaist corrupting Ibn Abidin's text? And then I realized that's Ibn Abidin himself. Okay, and then he's quoting Fatawa al-Khayriyya, which is by Khayruddin al-Ramli, Alamat al-Filistin, who quotes the hadith of the Prophet to show why a fatwa is preferable. So another thing that I was shocked was I thought that usul al-fiqh is produced mechanistically, meaning that when you look at a book of usul al-fiqh, what's usul al-fiqh? Legal theory, legal principles, right? But those principles should guide you to the Quran or Sunnah, and almost like you can shut your eyes and just crank out the hukam, the ruling, without any intermediary. It doesn't matter who it is, it's almost going to be unmediated, okay? And so that's almost like this top-down version of usul al-fiqh, okay? But Ibn Abidin turned me onto something here, which in a second I'll tell you who he is. But after laying out pages of arguments, he says, وَإِنْ كَانَ فِيهِ تَكَلُّفٌ. My argument is strained. I know my argument is strained. And it's khuruj an al-zahir. It's not so intuitive what I'm doing, but I have to argue for this. Otherwise, it causes all the ummah to be fusaq, because they're committing something that's haram. So I have to search for a fatwa that gives them a loophole out. And again, I thought that was just soft fiqh. That's a modern rupture, because the pre-moderns would be cranking it out without looking at the consequences it has on society. Does that make sense? Right? And so I thought, once I realized, oh man, that's Ibn Abidin, I was like, wait, what does that mean? Because I thought that whole weak sauce version of Islamic law started after colonization, right? And Ibn Abidin's before that. Okay, so this is where I had to, so you see, like, I had an idea that modernity is associated with certain things. Okay, now I'm going to go into, oops, not this one, what Islamic legal studies talks about, okay? Now there's two groups. Before I go into it, there's the old school people who are like, before Edward Said wrote a book called what? Orientalism, 1978. He wrote a book called Orientalism. So there's people before Orientalism, let's just call them Orientalists. There you go. Yeah. People in my department don't like that word, but anyways, yeah. And then we have revisionists, okay? But nevertheless, so the older people, they thought Islam was great in the beginning because ijtihad, everyone's free thinking. Abu Hanifa's not doing taqleed, Shafi'i's not doing taqleed, Malik's not doing taqleed. So it was really great. But once they started doing taqleed, they just felt it crashed, especially like about 200, 300 years after the founding madhahib. And so they have this era of decline all the way till what? 1798, when Napoleon shows up with the ideas of the French Enlightenment. And he's got the French Revolution. And so you see, according to this model, the only way that the Muslim world could become modern is through the violent interruption, aggression of Napoleon, where we have to force the Muslim worlds to show them how to think. Okay, so again, they think the Sharia is retrograde. It's declining. It doesn't have the ability to adapt, and therefore modernity is good. So you see, but nevertheless, they see a clash. You see the clash because Sharia is driven by taqleed, these people can't think for themselves, and modernity, which is driven by liberal principles, is good. They like modernity, because modernity for them is secularization and westernization. Okay, we're going to problematize that in a second, but just get this part, that Sharia and modernity don't mix here for the Orientalists. But pre-modern Sharia, if you want to stay true to the Sharia, you can't be modern, basically. Now, revisionists are people who do not, after Edward Said, they want to show that, well, actually, before Napoleon came, there was a lot of intellectual output already happening. And this idea that the Muslims had to wait for Napoleon to show them how to think is ridiculous. And so they do a good job in overturning some of these assumptions, right? But when they look at Ibn Abidin, who they consider Ibn Abidin, and particularly that letter on custom, to be a rupture from the tradition. Because for them, even the revisionists, they're trying to argue against the Orientalists, but they still think that cranking out model of usul al-fiqh, where you're just supposed to look at the hukm and not care about the influence of the ruling on society, they think that's the way it's supposed to be. And so for Ibn Abidin, he's being construed as, they actually use this word, Gerber, secularization, because of that article. That Ibn Abidin quotes ayahs, quotes hadith, quotes a lot of precedent, you know? And so secularization, to describe that, seems like this conscious effort to marginalize religion, which Ibn Abidin, he's trying to save the ummah from, the ship is not doing too well, you know? And he's very pious, as you can get that from paper, from reading him. But, yeah, so no matter what side of the camp you're on, the revisionists, they don't really like modernity. They see it as capitalism, colonization, and so they're like, no, the modernity is terrible. Why would the Sharia? They're trying to defend the Sharia, and they show how the Sharia has been adapting, but they don't like modernity because they see some of the bad aspects of modernity. And so, nevertheless, where you have the Orientalists or the revisionists, they both see Ibn Abidin's letter on custom as a rupture from the tradition. Because, in their mind, Sharia in the pre-modern was cranked out very impersonally, without looking at consequences, and I'm trying to figure out if that's true or not in my research. Okay. So Hallab, who's a famous scholar, Professor Hallab, he says in Ibn Abidin's, yeah, you know what? I should give a bio of Ibn Abidin. Let me do that's next. Yeah, Bismillah. Before I get to his bio, he charges him with the malady of epistemic schizophrenia, epistemological schizophrenia. In that Ibn Abidin, as Hanafi, yeah.
Is he a revisionist, or is he?
Yes, absolute revisionist. Yes. It's interesting. The revisionists are very sympathetic to the tradition and stuff like that. He's born in, Palestine.
Right?
And then the other two guys are Gerber and Ditson, who are Israelis. And And so they're all like trying to show how great Ibn Abidin is. Look at this free thought. Look how this guy just breaks from tradition, you know? So they like him for weird, other reasons. And so, so Ibn Abidin here, according to the revisionists, he suffers from schizophrenia in that he wants to be a good Hanafi, but he's also under the influence of liberal thought coming in, and he wants to acquiesce to the economic and the political situation, okay? And so you see, to be a non-schizophrenic would be to follow, actually he says, Zahir riwayah. Actually, what is Zahir riwayah? It's not only not following the Hanafi method, but you follow Abu Hanifa's opinions, that's it. It's crazy to think that, so he juxtaposes Abu Hanifa's opinions, Zahir riwayah, and humanistic considerations, and this is the malady in Ibn Abidin's head. I think the bifurcation is in Halak's head, and he's imposing it on Ibn Abidin. And I'll try to show you that. And so I read this other book that's really interesting by Christine Hayes. So she doesn't deal with Islam at all. She's dealing with Jewish rabbinic law. And she makes a fascinating argument here. She goes, we have two different notions of what it means to be divine law. What a divine law looks like. And because we're not disentangling these, we're making mistakes when we analyze texts. Okay, I'll give you an example. The Greeks have one version of God, okay? And that God is impersonal. Aristotle called the unmoved mover, the uncaused cause. And so it's inconceivable for that person to speak to humans, first of all, because it's impersonal, you know? And divine law, they believe in the concept of divine law, but it's static, it agrees with ontological reason, it has all these other assumptions that are philosophical, but the thing is, it's static and it's because it's divine, by definition, it must be static and top-down and authoritarian. Okay, that's the conception of the divine according to the Greeks. The rabbis have a very different conception, she says. For them, the divinity of the law is in the fact that it can be adapted, looking at sulh, looking at reconciliation instead of litigating. There's other ways to amend those things, mercy and ease. She says that there's a different ways coming from the rabbinic scriptures, but where are they rooting it in? They're rooting it in the will of a lawgiver, of a personal lawgiver who has desires. Yuridullahu bikum al-yusr. For the Greeks, there's it's an automaton, it's like a machine, right? And he doesn't care what's happening in society. You have to top down follow him. Whereas the Greeks have a God that speaks to them and sends messengers. The rabbis, the Jews, right? Which would be for the Greeks like crazy, no way, And even Kant, Immanuel Kant, all the way come back here, he has this book, Religion Between the Boundaries of Mere Reason, where he's talking about Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he said, first of all, when Ibrahim alayhi salam gave him the order to sacrifice his son, number one, he should have known that there's no way God can talk to him, because this guy's an empiricist, and he doesn't think, God's too far remote. And secondly, he should have listened because the moral law prevents us. So ethics is higher than anything else for Kant. It's higher than faith. Kierkegaard comes afterwards and does something else. But anyways, that's a whole. You can come to the class for that. So at the end of the book, Christine Hayes says that I bet the same thing is happening in Islamic studies. But I'm just a scholar of rabbinic law, and I'm like, you know what? I think that's also happening. When people hear, these Western academics hear Sharia or divine law, they automatically have certain assumptions, right, that come out of the Enlightenment, that it's hegemonic, that, to be concerned about the effect of the fatwa on society is you're not being, because God, according to them, is quite authoritarian. And so it makes sense that they, in order, in the Enlightenment, they had to remove religion out of society to make progress, right? And so I think in the background, their history, it affects them when they come to Islam, and they impose a lot of these same notions that if there's a flexibility in the Sharia, it must be a modern rupture, and it's coming from our liberal thought. That's the subtext, And I just wanted to investigate some of that stuff, and I'm going to conclude, yes, I think that they truck in a Hellenistic Greek notion of God that is very different from Yuridullahu bikum al-yusr. Right? There's no personal God. That God of the Greeks does not listen to dua at all. Like, you can't connect with him. There's no point in ibadah. Like, so they removed that God, they wouldn't even call him God, they call him the first mover or the uncaused cause or the demiurge, what Plato calls him. So my purpose here is to reframe the analysis of Ibn Abidin and to see where these words like secularization, I told you Gerber was using that term to define Ibn Abidin, but Ibn Abidin is doing it with a religious purpose. So the deen for Ibn Abidin has what they would call secular concerns. He's concerned about the environment, the economics, he's concerned about the political. Inshallah, if he was here, he'd be concerned about the environment too. And so I come up with this idea, which I'll come back to in a second. Let me tell you about Ibn Abidin. My slides got a little out of order here. The reason I'm showing you this is because how do authorities become constructed in Islam? What gives Ibn Abidin the agency to speak for the tradition? He goes through, he starts out in the marketplace. He's sitting at his dad's stall, and he's reading Quran, and he makes a mistake, and someone walks by, and they're like, what are you doing? You gotta go learn. You can't just read it however you want, ala kayf, as it says. Ala kayf, however you want, you gotta go learn. And so he goes to the Umayyad Mosque, and he starts learning the qira'at, right? And he spends years, in his youth, he's still young at this point, 12 to 16, he masters all the qira'at, but he gets proficiency in one discipline of Quran, and then he moves to fiqh. And then, actually, if you have questions, just ask me right now. On the spot. We don't have to wait till the end, inshallah. I came up with this classification. Bidayat al-Muqtadi is what book? Show of Hidayah is called, the method of Hidayah is called Bidayat al-Muqtadi. So that's where I get, Muqtadi means a person who's beginning fiqh. So I came up with the first category of his ibtida, and then he goes into the mutafaqih as like a practicing jurist, and then he becomes a faqih. The whole time he's writing essays and going through the whole curriculum, and then he becomes a mufti. Now, if you look at the last, it's hard to see, but that's okay. The younger Ibn Abidin, when he is 31, he writes, there's a controversy after there was a plague in Sham. It killed a bunch of people. And so what they started doing was they wanted to benefit the dead, so they would purchase Quran khatams. And he says that storefronts opened up where you could go and buy a khatam for your deceased. And so, you guys get that, right? Like you just, where someone will read it and then donate the thawab. Ibn Abidin is very vexed by this because he feels the purpose of recitation of the Quran is to purify your own nafs. The Quran is for tadabbur and to benefit yourself. Okay, so I'll go into that in a second, but in this early essay, he's criticizing this social practice, and he has a very limited view of oath. He changes 14 years later, he changes his view. He doesn't think local custom has any agency. And it's interesting, he's 31, he's been studying for a while, but his ideas completely changed. After 14 years, what happens? He never leaves Damascus. He studies in the Umayyad Mosque over there, but he never leaves Sham. In order to get a job, you got to go to where? You guys know? Istanbul. You have to go join one of the 12 colleges set up that put you into this whole system. You go and you become a faqih, you become a member of the machinery. Okay? They'll send you out as Qadi of Damascus, they'll send you out Qadi of Baghdad, Qadi of Medina. And Mufti of Damascus is Hussein Muradi. Ibn Abidin never goes anywhere. He stays in Damascus, except he goes to Hajj. But this guy who does have connections, Hussein Muradi, they're friends, and he says, I want you to be my assistant. Okay, so Ibn Abidin basically runs a fatwa office in Damascus, in Sham, not just Damascus. They come from everywhere, Lebanon, all what we would call Greater Syria. And so, the next phase is where he's working as a mufti, and his ideas, what is it except that he's practicing, and he's getting the wisdom by doing hundreds, probably thousands of fatwa in every single, realm, even think of economic, theological, political, ibadat and stuff. And so, ultimately in the next one, this is when he's working as a mufti, but then the next phase is when he becomes a faqih with nafs. Taqihun nafs, as Ghazali tells us, that it's a person who has a dhawq for giving fatwa. His palate is calibrated to where intuitively he knows what the hukum should be before the person's even done. You know, he doesn't have to look at the books because he's done so many that he's been programmed to know where the hukum is, or the fatwa should be. And so he writes at 45, he was 31, right, 14 years in between. Then he writes a letter on custom, in which he goes against his earlier opinions on it, which I'll explain a little more in detail. But I just wanted to highlight, he's not soft when it comes to the training at all. It's very rigorous, you know what I mean? And it's very rigorous. Just we can see in the books that he does not just one book, they do book after book after book after book, and he writes commentaries as he goes through himself. Yeah, and we have them all under that. Okay, that'll leave for academics. So what I come up with here is a model. And the sacred balance. Ibn Abidin thinks it's a duty on the mufti to know what the conditions in society are, and therefore do tanzeel of your fatwa. Make sure your fatwa doesn't cause harm. He gives numerous examples in which the mufti will do more harm than any benefit, because this fatwa will empower landlords to further economically bankrupt the peasants. That's what's happening at the time. Or there's another one that, the state, I'll go into these, but definitely he's very aware. Man jahila bi urfi zamanihi fahuwa jahil. He keeps using all these things you have to know the a'raf, the customs, or the custom is a general term he uses to throw in just like social norms, economic norms, and sometimes the norms of the ahl al-dawla is what he calls them. But when it comes to the staticness of the Greeks, I think that's true, and it holds in the ibadat, because no matter what socio-political, you gotta pray, no matter what kind of effect society, no matter where society's at, you have to pray, right? So there's a solid line around that. And so I'll concede that, the staticness that they assumed should be present in a divine law. There is staticness, absolutely. But in order to achieve what? The tahdhib of the nafs, the purification of your nafs, making you an abd lillah, those kind of things like the five, the prayer, the psalm, etc. Those work on your soul, so you don't get an excuse, and you don't really, I'm generalizing, but you don't really care about what economic situation or political situation. You got to pray, as opposed to mu'amalat. And I got this idea from Structure of Scientific Revolution. I don't know this. Maybe I'm going over my head here. Yeah. So Thomas Kuhn tells us how paradigm shifts happen, how Aristotelian physics shifted to Newtonian physics, Aristotelian biology shifted to Darwinian biology. Anyways, but he says that if you look at, is Aristotle a bad physicist? This is the question. Him and Kuhn, you know the answer right there. Kuhn thinks he is, Thomas Kuhn. But I don't want to, I'm going on a tangent now. But he says, no, Aristotle's a good physicist, or before even Darwin, a good biologist, using the framework that was given to him at that time, right? And so when he shows that what counts as an argument in Darwinian or Newtonian physics is very different from what counts as an argument in Aristotelian, So I was like, wow, the same thing in ibadat, an argument for ibadat, you have to have a text, a nas. We don't really care what your Allah says, what you think the opinion should be, right? Ibadat are set, okay? When you go to siyasa, he's like, there's no nusus here. It's qawa'id amma. He's quoting Ibn Nujaym, which means that there's not many specific texts that tell us what to do. There's no inherent political system or economic system that this tradition is tied to. Instead, can you see it's more open to social influence and political influence, because the nature of the realm, I call it a realm. Mu'amalat is kind of in the middle, okay? That there's a lot of nusus, a lot of texts, a lot of legal principles, but definitely the ibadat are haqq of Allah, right? Meaning that if it's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can see there's less room for you to wiggle, right? Mu'amalat are huquq al-nas. They're not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're for the stability of people and their livelihood, and therefore we should look at what causes stability in their lives. And siyasa is haqqullah, but it's composed of people, so it's a little bit of both. But the big upshot is here is that each functions differently. You can't use qiyas in ibadat. You can use qiyas in the middle. You're not going to use qiyas in the last one. You're just going to be doing other things, you know, in the siyasa realm. Okay, so I already told you about this, which was you can't go purchase Quran khatams because the purpose. So the good thing was he was so upset that he wrote this whole thing about the purpose of ibadah and and laysa lil insan illa ma sa'a. If you're going to go pay for this guy to go read your Quran and just sit at home and reap the benefits, it's just the whole purpose of the deen of ibadah kind of falls apart for him there. So he's very strict in this realm. Okay, and so like I said earlier, Ibn Abidin is insurance is there. You see Italy is a little boot sticking out over there. So in order, the word security comes from Genoa or Venice. Yeah, that's where the insurers were. And I was just amazed that this word entered into our Hanafi discourse, you know. But because of, like I was saying, in order to send your goods out there, because ultimately they completely robbed the Muslim lands of everything. We have this all documented into where like the gold, people's silverware, everything. Because after the local coins didn't mean, the Europeans wouldn't accept anymore because it wasn't worth anything. So they would only take their own currency. Once the Muslims couldn't present that, they just started taking anything they had. Silverware, belongings, you know, whatever. Probably a lot of manuscripts went, you know. And so this is kind of the backdrop. So I look at a bunch of, the thing that makes Ibn Abidin write the custom letter is a debasement policy, because Russia just took the Crimea up there. Okay, Crimea was part of like it was part of the Ottoman lands. Russia took it right before Ibn Abidin's time. So the Ottomans need to generate money, and so what they do is they take out money from coins had intrinsic gold and silver, and so they want to go fiat currency and use that gold and silver to finance the jihad and reforms and military to stand up to the Russians. And so in that, we have this issue in Hanafism, and actually all the madhabs, called riba al-fadl. Let's see, who knows what riba al-fadl is? When you have an exchange of gold and silver, has to be for equal or unequal? Equal amounts, equal amounts. Well, yeah, riba al-fadl would be unequal, yeah. So the problem here is that the coins have just different quantities because there's a lot of successive debasement. So you have coins that are all different, and therefore if I borrow, you know, $100 in coins from you, I'm supposed to know how much gold each one has according to the whole doctrine and repay that with you. But I'm just going off the face value. So it's a shift from intrinsic monetary, what's the technical word for that? To fiat currency, there's a name for it. When money has
Standard.
intrinsic value, what is it?
Gold base?
Gold, yeah, I love it. Let me see, did I write it? No. Okay, it's okay. Also, the sale of intangibles. The Ottomans, this goes back to, again, Nuruddin Zingi and Salahuddin. In order to incentivize military people to go fight, what I'll do is I'll give you a big plot of land, okay? So the Ottomans control all the lands. Okay, there's no private property in the Lockean sense yet, and so because it's all Waqf land, but it's all controlled by the military, and the military rents out the land to peasants. Now the peasants, or they're called that, but the rest of the population basically. What if they want to build? Yeah, your question? No. What if they want to build a factory and put in a bunch of machinery? And if I spend that much time, I'm going to make sure it goes to my son, Habibullah, right? Rather than, because a waqf is not supposed to be what? A waqf is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not supposed to be in mawruf, right? You know, you're not supposed to be able to own a waqf because it belongs to someone else. But what happens is, Bay'ul Ma'dum. What is Bay'ul Ma'dum? Is a fuqaha here, right? Is the sale of something that doesn't exist permissible or not permissible? It's not, right? Hadith Abu Dawud. How do we know whether something exists or doesn't exist? Okay, so the early fuqaha borrowed from Aristotle this way of looking at the world, ontology. The only thing that exists are things that are physical, ayn, johar, as opposed to, what's the opposite of johar? A'rad, accidents, they don't exist. So usufruct doesn't exist. Usufruct means the use. Can I purchase the use of this thing? No, you can't, according to Hanafis, because they think it's bay'ul ma'dud. The Shafi'is are okay with the Malikis that eventually come on board with it. But even Ibn Rushd, in his famous book, Bidayat al-Mujtahid, he tells us that there were a bunch of fuqaha, early fuqaha, even rejected the ijara contract, because a rental contract is when I'm basically selling you the usufruct of this apartment for 1 month, right? And they went so hard, they rejected that contract because they were so committed to seeing the world as only thing that exists and that can be saleable is a tangible man, right? And it has an ayn, okay? So you can see how that could be a problem. Why? Because what if I want to transfer the usufruct to my son of this facility, right? And so Ibn Abidin has to reinvent this, not reinvent, but just rethink, can we attach financial maliyah? Can we say that this has financial worth so that we can sell it to, or bequeath it to the next generation? Now, the other madhabs are okay with that, but the Hanafis had a problem with that because let me just go back. The waqf exists, some Ottoman military guy owns it. I have been working in this factory, I created the factory, I brought all this machinery to set it up, okay? And what I'm doing, I'm renting it through this, it's a rental contract, I'm paying for the usufruct. And now, what incentive do I have to build on it and make it bigger if it's not going to go to my children, right? So they came up with this idea of selling the haqq al-qarar, the right to use that facility in perpetuity. And Mufti Taqi Ismani, when he gives his fatwa on franchise, copyrights, and intangibles, this is the mas'ala that he relies upon in Hashim Ibn Abidin, he builds upon it. So you see how Ibn Abidin is also helping us deal with our modern issues. You guys know what franchise rights, right? Franchise and copyrights is not a tangible thing, right? You have the ownership of something that's not tangible, not physical. So Mufti Taqi bases that whole thing upon this section of the Hashia. And anyways, there's a lot going on in which the economy is about to, it implodes. It does implode. And actually, what we thought, the bureaucrats who initiated the reform, the debasements, they knew that rampant inflation would come about if you start debasing the currency. But they thought that the short-term gains, the long-term gains is that we'll beat the Russians, we'll beat all these people out, and we'll get back the Ottoman Empire. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out. The short-term, we know what happened, you know what I mean? Actually, the economic situation became so bad that this is the case with the East India Company, but the French and the British, they felt like they had to come in now physically, aggressively to protect their loans, which led to the political domination. But they're tied. Okay, so that is him doing his adjustments and using custom and darura, darura meaning necessity, right? Just not looking at a text, but looking at the need for society to stabilize the ummah here. He's not an Ottomanist. He never says, I have to do this for the Ottomans. He says it for the ummah Islamiyya. The ummah is who he's beholden to, you know? But who's in charge of the ummah happens to be the Ottomans at that time. Lastly,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That thing up there.
Mm-hmm.
Did he write it?
No, that's the coin. That's one of the coins by Sultan Mahmud. So he says Sultan Mahmud, Khaqan al-Bahrain. That is the Ottoman ruler during Ibn Abidin's time. And so he's the one who's doing all these things while Ibn Abidin is responding from the Hanafi tradition, you know? Good question. Lastly here, okay, who knows what, hold on. Kuchuk Kainarcha. Is anyone Turkish here? Kuchuk. I'm trying to learn how to say it properly. Okay. And, yep, what is it? Oh, you know. No? Okay.
Just a smart.
I don't know what it means. I'm just trying to pronounce it. let me just tell you that. Okay, so let me explain what happens here. We have Hanafis, like, here, I'll just go off the screen so you guys can look at. How did the Abbasids end in 1258? What happened in 1258? Very famous year. The Mongols, right? Okay. And so they killed the Abbasid Caliph, the last one there. And then someone pops up in Cairo, claiming to be a descendant of him. And so the Mamluks are like, oh, wow, let's put this guy into power immediately, you know? And so then you have this idea of Salim comes in 1513, the Ottoman, he kind of takes this Abbasid and takes him to Istanbul and supposed to confer upon the Ottomans some kind of legitimacy, right? At least we have some connection back to the Abbasids. Well, I looked through all the books, well, not all. Ibrahim al-Halabi, and secondly, the Hanbali, Dalil al-Talib, al-Ma'arri, Yusuf al-Ma'arri, Karmi, right? They're both in Cairo, and they're saying, I was shocked, first of all, La Khalifat al-An, there's no caliph right now, but there's someone who's claiming to be a caliph Zahiran, but Batinan, outwardly they call him caliph, but inwardly, he's not a real caliph because he doesn't fulfill the conditions. The one who's sitting in this palace in Cairo has no shoka or quwwah, has no power, which is one of the conditions for the caliphate. Neither is the Mamluk a Qurayshi, because al-A'imma min Quraysh. Al-A'imma min Quraysh meaning that the caliphs have to be from the Quraysh. Now, Dalil al-Talib, al-Karmi, the Hanbali scholar, also at the same time in Cairo, is telling us that the caliphate's over. He was killed, and apparently he was like wrapped in a carpet or something and trampled. And that, so I have multiple madhabs saying that there's no caliphate anymore. We have sultanate, sultan, we have sultans, and I'm like, so normally, I don't know when do you guys think the caliphate can't pops back up? Sultan Abdul Hamid, right? You guys know Sultan Abdul Hamid? Yeah, Sultan Hamid, 1909, he's very explicit with the caliphate, okay? But it actually popped up way before that, in the Treaty of Kujuk? Let me see, Kujukai Narja. Yes. So let me tell you what happened. Just right before Ibn Abdi, I see, wait, what time did we start at? Stop for a while. Let me see. This is basically the end right here. Okay, what time did we start at though? 8-ish?
Like 8 something.
Okay, inshallah. This is the end of it. But this is important here because the Ottomans lose Crimea to the Russians. But they're very strategic, they're very smart. They're like, okay, wait, we'll give you those lands politically, but in the khutbah and the adhan and all that stuff, you have to make dua for the Ottoman Khalifa now. Okay? So they still want to exercise some like spiritual, religious influence, even though they're politically not there anymore. And so the Russians are okay with it, like, we don't care, whatever, give us the land. But now the Ottomans start calling themselves caliph. Okay, and it makes sense because Muhammad Ali is, like I said, he broke off. Muhammad ibn Wahhab is doing his own thing. If the Ottomans declare themselves as like a legitimate khilafah, then you can wage war and have jihad against even these Muslims, right? And so, before that, I couldn't find, I looked throughout the centuries, Al-Habawi, all these Hanafis, they would not say the Ottoman Sultanate is the caliph because they're not Qurayshi. They're not Qurayshi. And that's one of the conditions, right? And so, but when you get to Ibn Abdin, yeah.
That was one of the conditions according to who?
According to very good. According to who? Where do we find this? It's really interesting. We find it in books of Aqidah. Why books of Aqidah? Why would Imamate be in the books of Aqidah? Shia and Fatimids and the Buwayhids. So basically what happened, that's why even Mawardi writes his book at that same time, Ahkam al-Sultaniyya and Abu Ya'la al-Farra also, because the Fatimids have a rival caliphate, okay? The Buwayhids have taken over the Abbasids, basically. And so the books, if you look at any Aqidah book, there's always a section on imama, and if you look at, I looked at, whatever, the Muta'akhirin, actually even people earlier, they're saying this chapter on imama has nothing to do with theology, but we're forced to put it in here because the Shias, and their doctrine of imama has all this other stuff included in it, and we need to bring this into theology just to clarify it. So they recognize that a distinction between these things, but nevertheless they have the distinct in there. So because it's now in all, like Aqidah Nasafiyya, Taftazani, Tafsir al-Adilla of Abu Maymun al-Nasafi 505 is in there, but those are theology books, and so the theologians are the ones who, and the fuqaha, they come up with, they're kind of like the same lot anyways. They're the ones who lay out the conditions for a valid, that's actually a really good question. Where and who lays out these conditions, and what conditions emerge at what time? First, in the beginning, they said it's not permissible to have an imam that's a fasiq. And Jassas is crazy about this, he wants, and if the caliph becomes a fasiq, it's West upon you to go and remove him. Obviously, that's not going to work. That's Iraq. But when they go to Central Asia, the Hanafis have to deal with these Samanids, they're warlords, basically, and they'll kill you if you mess with them, And so they actually, Bezdawi says in the Usul al-Din that basically, the Samanid ruler called everyone and said, hey, what do you, I got you, yeah. He said, if I'm guilty of stealing money, drinking alcohol, am I valid? And they're like, no, and he killed them all. And then basically said the next day he brought all Ahl Sunnah which are the Maturidis, and like, if I do fisk and all these things, am I kicked out? And they're no, Imam al-Fasiq is Ja'iza indana. And then he he liked that. Okay, so the point is, there's two, Iraq would not allow for that opinion, okay? Because the Abbasids were already weak, they weren't going to do anything. But Central Asia, they threw Sarakhsi in jail, remember? Sarakhsi, yeah, those guys were tough. They threw Sarakhsi in jail, and then they killed a lot of famous ulama. It's all documented in there. But anyways, my point is, see, the Hanafis have to lose the condition that the imam has to be adal at that point, because they can't, otherwise there won't be a ruler, because none of them are just at that point. Okay, that's a great question, thank you. Okay, let me just go back to this. So Ibn Abidin, sorry. Go ahead.
Does the emphasis of these early Hanafis like Jassas and Sarakhsi on the imam not being a fasiq have to do with their tendency towards i'tizal?
Yes, good job.
Because they say that if you're a fasiq, you're not really Muslim, but you're not really kafir.
Manzila bayna manzilatayn. He doesn't use that argument. That's a good one. But he said, La yanalu ahdi al-zalimin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the ahd is mashrut by not being a zalim, and therefore if he's committing sin, he loses his imam. He quotes the ayah, and he quotes Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa was very rambunctious. He encouraged the Nafs al-Zakiyya, the two sons of Hassan, he encouraged them to rebel. Who else? He's involved with supporting a bunch of rebellions, Abu Hanifa was. So they're like, look, Abu Hanifa was all about making sure that we had a political authority who was just. And the other people, it's interesting, there's another riwayah from Abu Hanifa, but also Abu Yusuf becomes Qadi al-Qudat who Harun al-Rashid, so they follow a different model in Central Asia afterwards. But yes, the i'tizal has a major idea, I left it out because I didn't want to be too academic, but the Mu'tazilite, the Hanafis, Karhi, Jassas, actually, you know what, I actually remember now, the reason they included imama in theology books is because they say the Khawarij say what? Actually, the Khawarij say you don't even need an imam. You don't need an imam, it's not a wajib, yeah. And then the Shia think that the imam can only be from Ahlul Bayt, and the third group. But anyways, that's a really good question. And the Mu'tazilites, I guess, would be the Imam al-Fasiq would be the problem with that, yeah.
But it's not like uniquely a Mu'tazili position. Like you would have non-Mu'tazili Hanafis, and like you mentioned, Abu Hanifa. You'd have to accuse Abu Hanifa of i'tizal if you were to say his
Oh, you know what? Yeah, let me see. I don't know. It's manzila bayna manzilatayn is what you would, meaning that the Khawarij that if you committed a sin, you're out of Islam. The Mu'tazilites say you're in an intermediary position. I can't say you're in heaven or hell. You're just kind of like in purgatory. He doesn't bring that argument up at all, actually, in Ahkam al-Quran. I read it intensely. And so, I don't think it's the ideas of Mu'tazilism, but just this idea of Amr bin Ma'ruf to the bone. They're about it, you know what I mean? I'm sorry. They're really pro Amr bin Ma'ruf. And that means like getting rid of the Buwayhids. It was the Buwayhids he wanted to kick out. He calls them Majus. He doesn't even think they're Muslim. Just us. You guys get that, saying that they're Shia, but they're really just Iranians. Not just Majus, meaning they're not Muslims, sorry, not Iranians. They're coming from Iran, but they're in Baghdad. That's a good question, yeah. So I don't, it's not his i'tizal per se. There's no ideas that are uniquely Mu'tazili that there.
It seems more regional than even like school-based, because you have a lot of the Hanbalis that take the same stance. It's only until like more like Egyptians like Tahawi or Abu Mujahid al-Basri will like come and then start like declaring ijma on it. But I think you have like it even transcends school lines more than that.
Yeah, the ijma comes afterwards, and I think it's regional too. But and then time, yeah, I think it's regional. I have a paper on this, inshallah, with all the resources on there.
Are we going to go to his bio, please?
Which one?
No, I believe. His
Oh.
bio.
The bio? No, the bio. I went for his bio. But let me just finish this. The treaty of the treaty, whatever, brings back the caliphate. After I showed you Ibrahim al-Halabi, Ma'arri, they're just like, they're sultanate. They're not even trying. And actually the consequence of that is like, we don't have to listen. If there's no caliph, we don't have to listen. We just follow our madhab. Right? They asked for Abu Yusuf. He changed his opinion to please Harun al-Rashid a few times. And so they're like, well, that was back then we had a legitimate caliph. We don't have one now, so we don't have to listen to these caliphs at all. We just do our own thing, what's best for what we think as Hanafis. So now, but Ibn Abidin starts using Khalifa Ma'mun. And I'm just like, what? He's calling him Khalifa? He's Sultan Mahmud. Okay, but it makes sense. It's very pragmatic because the Muslim lands are decentralized. They're kind of like autonomous in different areas. Like I said, Mecca and Medina to Muhammad al-Wahhab. Egypt and Syria are part of Muhammad Ali. And so in order to consolidate power, the caliphate seems like a really good option at that time, you know? And so Ibn Abdi is not he's one of the first Arabs, because I know that Abu Sa'ud Effendi, who is Turkish, he used the word caliph for description once of Suleiman the Magnificent. What's Suleiman? The lawgiver. Is it magnificent? No. Is it magnificent? Magnificent, yeah, okay. So Ibn Abidin, I'm not going to go into there's a lot of political issues and I tried to look at how he resolves those because he wants to bring power back to the Ottomans. And at the end, he's very cautious of not giving them too much power. So he allows for khad'ul imam, khuruj ala al-hukam. What does that mean? Right, you can remove the political authority. Sultan Abdul Hamid in 1908, he burned the Hashia, officially banned it from the Ottoman Empire because of this chapter. Because Ibn Abidin, someone told him, has a chapter on that incites rebellion, Bab Khal'ul Imam, on the conditions of when it's permissible to remove an imam. And the thing is interesting, he's quoting, Ibn Abidin is quoting, I call it philosophy, I should call it theology. He's quoting a Taftazani, not Taftazani too, but Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani. These are books of philosophical theology. And he relies upon them a lot to articulate what is the power of the caliph and also when you can remove the caliph. And what was surprising for me is that he quotes Ibn al-Humam here, where he says, if the turuqat are not amina, if the streets are not safe, that means you can't establish tijara, then if there's like an inversion of what is good for Muslims and like the Muslim Ummah is not achieving maslahah, then it's permissible to remove the caliph. And he lays out all these things, but it's not just because of, I guess most people would think that, if he jeopardizes our ability to do ibadat, right? Something very religious, right? What if he's messing up our secular, our dunya? They lay out that it's permissible, and I detail all of this in there, and Taftazani agrees with them, obviously. And so I was surprised to see that He's religiously, the caliphate has a duty to uphold the deen and the dunya, and the idea of this hard binary between religion and secular does not work here, because deen encompasses, what we would call secular here. Okay, so that's it. I just wanted to end. There's a really funny quote I came across in Shakespeare, where he says, "Your Western academics, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt up in your philosophy." So they think of divine law, Sharia, it has to be authoritarian and hegemonic and not congruent with material progress, right? So I'm just like, no, wait, let's see what is in the books and expand it a little bit. There's another category of way of theorizing Sharia that will, that's beyond what you can see. Yes, that's it.
Did Abidin give a definition of how they define what the maslaha is? Like, what's the criteria? Like,
Maslaha?
Yeah. Like, how did because that could be very broad. I mean, it can mean different things in different.
Yeah, but so also, who has the authority to make determinations? So custom, maslaha, these are abstract things, right? And so someone has to say, hey, that's a good maslaha, or that's a good custom, and they have to write it in a text, and they have the authority to write a text that's going to be written by other Hanafis and other fuqaha. So there's a big authority component, like unless a person who trains, they get to make those determinations because they get to and so I guess, what I'm trying to say is people always are scared, and I understand about the abuse of these tools, right? But for him, it's fuqaha who are continuing in this written tradition. And so he does have a lot to say about maslaha, which is really interesting because I think he's the first to tie custom, and this was the debasement custom. No one, you don't have a choice. The Ottomans are taking the gold and silver out. What are you going to do about it? And it's all over the Muslim lands. And then so he said he ties urf and trying to change people's habits that are so ingrained in them. That goes against maslaha, but it's also taklifu ma la yutaq. It's an instance of imposing an obligation that is beyond human capacity, which the Hanafis reject. The Ash'aris allow it aqlan. Anyways, yeah, the Hanafis reject it. Good question. I'll have more to say about that. We can talk afterwards. Yeah, bismillah. I'm gonna sit down now. Yeah, bismillah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the talk. Alhamdulillah, we benefited so much from it. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this mode of doing history, of intellectual history, which is like the biographies of great men. This idea is a little difficult. As somebody who thinks about American law, it would be strange to think that, can I understand originalism by understanding the life of Scalia? That'd be a strange, I think, enterprise to do. Obviously, studying the Islamic intellectual tradition is a little bit different. Part of it's just a matter of resources. So, looking at materials, and if you want to read, a magnum opus, you really are studying the person who wrote that magnum opus. I guess that's one part of it. I think I want to ask you about is the spiritual dimension. As participants in this tradition, this embodied tradition, are the terms of the debate different because we consider ourselves the inheritors of this embodied tradition? I wouldn't study the life of Scalia because he's a pious person, but you study the life of Ibn Abidin because he is your spiritual academic forefather. So are the terms of the scale of the intellectual pursuit different because of this spiritual dimension?
Great question. So, there's this idea that historians started pushing back and looking at the conditions that produced Einstein, right, or Shafi'i. And they're like, well, the conditions, meaning the trends on the ground, were already headed to that. Just if it wasn't Einstein who filled that stuff, there would have been someone like Einstein or Shafi'i. So it's reducing the idea of the great intellectual and focusing instead on the social conditions that produce that person. Okay, and I like that too. So actually, my conclusion in this is Ibn Abidin is not unique or revolutionary. He's just a standard Hanafi, and everyone is making a big deal out of it because they're not looking at what preceded. They have a lens from classical Hanafism going back centuries, and they impose that lens upon Ibn Abidin without looking at things before him. And so the material conditions are important here because, again, Ibn Abidin is not that different, except that he's living at a time when there's a shift from agrarian to industrialization overnight. And he's having to update the Hanafi method to deal with these. And then the shift from empire to nation state. And so I like that idea, and I'm sympathetic, which is why I focused any perceived rupture in his thought should be attributed to the material conditions and what's going on in society. And so going back to the great men thing, I'm very, they used to call it the history of ideas, or no, it was a history of ideas. Now they call it intellectual history. Because of this reason, because history of ideas makes ideas sound like they're floating out there, divorced from society, and now they call it intellectual history because of the same move. So yeah, I follow intellectual history, and I think that is important. Let me go to the second part. So the second part is there's an insider-outsider debate here, like that goes on. Like part of my little jab here was like, they're outsiders to our tradition. They're not Muslim, first of all, but you don't have to be Muslim to analyze this, right? But, normally, as Hassan, you don't do this. You don't actually list out your mashayikh in the beginning of a dissertation. Do you? Or no? No, right? It's weird. So if I thanked all these mashayikh that I studied would link me up to, I was reluctant. I was like, oh man, should I do this or not? They're gonna know who I am. You know what I mean? They're not gonna appreciate, they're not gonna look at me, they're gonna look at me as biased, But I didn't care anymore, because the insider-outsider thing presupposes a self that can disconnect from society, the Lockean self, anyways. So I push back on this insider-outsider thing. I'm like, there's a subtle argument here that I, as an insider, am showing you academic work that we're not all biased. We can actually, we actually can know something. Now the spiritual thing, we can actually contribute to the academy while being insiders. Because that's what I did, Now the spiritual thing, that's very interesting. Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, I guess what I'm thinking is that, like, our tradition, our inherited tradition is an embodied tradition, which is very different than, many other traditions. For example, the Western legal tradition, where it's not an embodied. You have a source, cite the source. It doesn't really matter who the person who wrote that. Right. It's the authority by which it stands. The person could be good or bad, fasik or not, but it doesn't matter. It's the authority that you cite. Whereas in our tradition, it's really important. Our knowledge is embodied. It's important that the people that are embodying this religion, this knowledge, and passing it down.
It's embodied, but it's discursive. What I mean is a discourse. Where is my discoursive thing? Hold on, these are all overlapping disciplines. Sorry, let me go back. What I mean by discourse is I might be the wali of everywhere. That's why, in the Jawharat al-Tawheed, he talks about the iman of the muqallid. Is the iman of the muqallid, if a person who, in Aqidah, says, I believe because my parents have believed, what's the status of that person's iman? Anyways, whatever the hukm is, some people, in the method, he says, some people have said it's permissible according to Kesh. And I remember Muhammad Hassan Hito, the guy I studied with, he was like, why would Bajuri or the comment, Kesh, this is kalam here, It's a discourse. Kesh, if you're going to pull out the Kesh card, the argument's going to be over. And so, there is a spiritual component, and for Ibn Abidin, when he's talking about the people, actually, people permitted, Hanafis permitted the sale of khatams. Okay, and he starts asking about their ikhlas. And the thing is, they're financially benefiting from that fatwa. And so there's a spiritual component, but he's very discursive. Discursive meaning that you have to have hujjaj that makes such proofs that accord with Hanafism at the time. These are discursive traditions. What I mean, there's Zahir riwayah, and we're continuing, those are the books of Abu Hanifa and Shaybani, and we're continuously commenting on them, right? Those go back to the Sunnah. A discursive tradition always exists in a certain time and place. And so there's conditions that are affecting the person writing the text, And the writing of the text is how the text continues. I'm just saying, like, if people stopped writing and just did the spiritual thing, which is great, you know, I'm all about the soul anyways, you know. The thing is, I understand the spiritual component, but I don't know if it enters into this realm, because Ibn Abidin got shuhra in his life for, meaning he became famous in his life, not because of spiritualness, because that came after he became like, oh, Ibn Abidin, you know, the wali, Khatam al-Muhaqqaqin. But in his life, he was known for being a good Hanafi, and knowing how to write fatwas that addressed this, Hall al-Mushkilat is what his son said, he had a dhawq for it. And so, that dhawq is not dhawq ruhani, it's dhawq fiqhi, ifda'i. And, good question. We can talk about it afterwards. Bismillah, tafadhal. Yep.
Can you get a bit into how this whole like approach over Islamic history and throughout modernity developed, of how like in the modern day we see people like Qaradawi rahimahullah who adopted this very maqasid based approach, as they call it, right? And then he said Ibn Abidin started writing a lot about like urf and maslaha. So before, like, what's the history, what's the timeline, how did this all start developing into urf, maslaha, maqasid? Who were the key figures who contributed to this?
Okay. So the thing that threw me off in that footnote up there is when he said that the qawa'id of the sharia wa maqasiduha taqtadi this taysir, you know, so that again, like, oh man, this is a very maqasidi discourse. It has to be from Rashid al-Ridha, you know? And so once Ibn Abidin, I looked, and so he was quoting this Fatawa al-Khairiyya, this is a Khairuddin al-Rabli, and the same thing, the khilu contract of the sale of intangibles. And I could, this guy in the 1600s, Alamat al-Filistin, he was saying, there's a naf'un kabir, right, in this, and he talks about Sultan Ghuri implemented this in the Awqaf of Egypt, and it led to this financial, you know, explosion. And so I again thought it was a modern break, but then there's the theorization. The theorization of the maqasid comes from Usul al-Fiqh, Jawaini, Ghazali, Mustasfa, and Razi, because it comes in after Turuq al-Dala ala, when you have qiyas. When you want to do qiyas, you either have a text, right? You know, or something like that, explicit, or imam, and then you get to the third one, which is the illah, or the goal behind it, right? So from there, you have the Shafi'is really developing and laying out, because Ali Mustasfa lays out all the 5 maqasid and stuff like that, but you don't see them like using them that much, you know? And again, this is interesting because Ibn Abidin is a usuli and faqih. And so his use of urf and darura in his fatawa is all over the place. So to say that for him it's a depreciated tool, I don't think that's the case. But Hanafis actually include this in qiyas. It's sometimes in istihsan or even in qiyas, like I was just saying. So it was part of. It's Abu Hanifa goes back. I would say Abu Hanifa and Istihsan, and it developed in Samarkand and Balkh before that, to where they had the principles. But again, think about it. If the whole society is empire and agrarian, you're not going to have that many masail that are radically different. So you can still use qiyas all day. Qiyas is an analogy. You can still analogize, you know. But when you have this radical shift, you're going to have to go broader than qiyas. Well, actually, no. I think these are part of qiyas. So I think what happened was the reason we start seeing more quantitative use of it is because the material conditions, the political systems and the economic system shifted from the 1,000 years of literature that we had. And therefore, just accommodating with that and establishing continuity required those tools. But they're all rooted in Muhammad al-Shaybani himself and al-Hujjah al-Madinah. What's that mean? Muhammad al-Shaybani is a student of Hanifa, is number 2 or 3 in the Hanafi school. He has a refutation of Malik. He studied with Malik after he left Kufa, right? And he has a book called The Proof Against الحجة على أهل المدينة. He quotes the hadith ما رآه المسلمون حسنا فهو عند الله حسن. That it's a hadith that is mawquf on Abdullah bin Mas'ud. But halak, when Ibn Abedin uses it, he's like, Ibn Abedin is guilty and he knows he's guilty because this is a universally declared weak hadith. It's raf'an weak, waqfan sahha, and I show Hanafis all the way from Shaybani to the end using the hadith. Anyways, I think, did that help at all? No?
It did.
Okay. I don't want to stop. We can talk all night, but I know some people got to go. Yeah, bismillah.
You know, in a
Wait, let me ask someone. Should we end and then I can just kick it, hang out, or I mean, if people have to go, but we have one hand. Go ahead. No, man, you got a question, bro. Bismillah.
You know, Islam there's like four different scholars: Hanbali, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanafi. Why is did Abu Hanifa did he make all the rules by like delaying a certain like for a prayer and stuff and did he like come up with all these rules?
Excellent question. He only has a limited amount of rulings, okay? And so Ibn Hadith quotes this thing, he says, لو رأى أبو حنيفة what the متأخرين saw لأفتى كما أفتوا. He would give the fatwa and agree with the later scholars who went against his opinion because they're using his principles, which shows us that yes, Abu Hanifa gives us a certain amount of positive law, which is like fiqh rulings, but then also in the next generation they start developing a usul, like the theory behind it. The generation after that really comes to Karqi has an usul and stuff like that. And so using those principles, they're able to extend and predict Abu Hanifa's opinion on things that happen outside of his lifetime. And that's one of the main things I want to show. That tradition doesn't mean they follow just the rules of Abu Hanifa. They're able to be, how does 1,085 years all the way to modernity? Like, it's broader than just specific rulings of Abu Hanifa. It's principles that then they extrapolated. Halak thinks Ibn Abedin is the first to make this kind of claim, that if Abu Hanifa were alive, he would give the fatwa like we're giving the fatwa. And so I looked, and Jamal al-Ghaznawi in the 1200s is saying, and he's saying that same thing, and Ibn Abi is quoting him. So you see, like in Halak's mind, he thinks a lot of the moves Ibn Abedin is making is like a rupture, a break, a discontinuity from some pristine, authentic tradition, whereas if he goes back, you can see Ibn Abedin is just quoting people before him. That's why the conclusion is Ibn Abedin is not that, he's just a standard Hanafi.
And my other question was that you were talking about some sort of a shift that
Oh, it's a metaphor, yeah. The shift meaning, the Ummah Islamiyya, yeah.
So who was the owner? What was the owner's name? Was it Abedin or somebody else?
Of the ship?
Yeah.
Well, the ship was meaning just like the Ummah, and like, so the Ummah is under attack internally and externally, and he's like, look, if we get the caliphate going, get these economic reforms going, we can take back Mecca and Medina, we can take back Egypt, we can fortify the borders, that's the ship, and we can sail to, Jannah, inshallah, together. It was a metaphorical ship. Alhamdulillah.
And this whole history takes place in like Sham and Turkey and stuff?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
This whole
Yes, I focus on Ibn Abedin, which is Damascus.
But Ibn Abedin.
But I'm looking through his eyes, and he's talking about Turkey, he's talking about Dar al-Harb, which is Venice, he's talking about these different areas, and I try to just see like what his vantage point is, Any questions? Aisha, assalamu alaikum. No questions from the sisters? No?
See, you mentioned that you're gonna give like
Course?
Yeah,
10-week course, inshallah, after Ramadan. Basically, you see there's let me pull this back up actually. Okay, the dissertation is long. It took me a long time to write it. and I want to spend, it's not up there, right? Will it's too difficult, yeah. I'm gonna go through the 10 weeks, inshallah, and do like one chapter a week. I think there's 7 or 8 chapters, and one, before and after, talking about Western studies and kind of some of the assumptions. So yeah, I think after Ramadan, I think you'll see, soon you'll see advertisements here at IOK, inshallah. But anyone is welcome, marhaban. Any other questions? Bismillah wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Ya Allah, make me a mufassir, make me a mufassir, make me a mufassir. Right now, I'm done with fiqh. All I care about is tafsir wa kalam Allah. Enough Foucault and Abu Hanifa or Malik or Shafi. All I want is to tadabbur of kalamillah. So I ask Allah, ask Allah to help me out, inshallah, give me tawfiq in this. But alhamdulillah, may Allah make this all the time I put it here, make it لخدمة الأمة المحمدية وإعلاء كلمة الله سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. جزاكم الله خيرا.
Inshallah. There's Sheikh Yusuf Wahab is coming by. Sheikh Yusuf Wahab.
He's here?
He's coming by, I think next week at the Majlis. So he's talking about Tadabbur if you're interested.
Oh yeah, he's coming back here tomorrow?
No, at the Majlis.
Oh, nice. Okay, mashallah.
If you're interested.
I got my feds coming.
Oh, okay.
Sideswipe, not the sideswipe, it was like that's what we think, but they ran away. We don't know. It's Christmas Eve, that's what sounds like. This, we have to call the cops. The car's there for walks. Alhamdulillah, we have insurance, so.
Man, is this still? Okay.
Like when I actually meet you